see. Good morning, everybody. Wim de Koning here, E-Link Innovation, part of Lincoln University. Innovation series today, we'll talk about sustainable finance. We're just waiting for some of the people coming in, and then we will start this webinar. I see still people coming in. Good morning, everybody. Virtual event, B-Link Innovation series, talking about sustainable finance. You're all very welcome. We'll give it another minute or so people can find a seat and look for their own emergency exit and get a cup of coffee ready. We still have some people coming in. Welcome, everybody. B-Link Innovation series, sustainable finance this morning. And I'll start, if that's okay. If I get thumbs up from Katie, I get thumbs up from Katie. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to B-Link Innovation Series. We will be talking about sustainable finance this morning. And before I'm going to go into the topic and introduce our lineup of speakers this morning, we'll just give you a short introduction about B-Link Innovation, who we are, what we do, some housekeeping, and then we'll get the show on the road. This webinar about sustainable finance is brought to you by B-Link Innovation. We are a full business unit of Lincoln University, and we basically do three things. One, we try to connect people, and we do that through these type of events, sometimes virtual, sometimes in person. And because we are absolutely convinced that if people actually connect and start to talk to each other, then if there is a shared passion, people start to collaborate. And we are absolutely convinced that when that collaboration intention is there, that real innovation takes place. So those are the three pillars that B-Link Innovation is actually working from. Some housekeeping before we actually get into this webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and afterwards the recording will be sent to you. There is all the participants are muted. There on the bottom of your screen there is this Q&A button. Please use the Q&A button to ask your question, and then by the end, so if after we have listened to all three speakers, we will actually have a Q&A session, and for you to actually be able to connect with the speakers. Yeah, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Dean Spicer from the ANZ Bank. He is an alumni from Lincoln University, did a Bachelor of Commerce, and then he went on an exchange program to California State University, and he has more than 25 years in the financial markets, covering equity funds management, debt capital markets in the UK, New Zealand, continental Europe, and joined ANZ in 2006 and returned from London back to this beautiful group of islands that we call Aotearoa New Zealand. And as head of capital markets, he worked there and with ANZ until 2020, and then he basically took his current role as head of sustainable finance. And that's where I had the pleasure of meeting Dean as well when the government actually set up the Sustainable Agriculture Finance Initiative. So he has been really involved in sustainable finance here in New Zealand from the get-go. At the moment, he's a member of the Center of Sustainable Finance, and he is really passionate about this. So, without any further ado, Dean, the floor is yours. and I'll stop to share.
Yes, kia ora tātou, morena everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I have had a malfunction on my camera this morning, so that's been a little bit of a challenge. So I apologise for that, but I've been told I've got a face made for radio, so possibly that's not such a bad thing. Look, I'm kicking off. One of my colleagues, Steve Dixon, will follow on from me. He's going to pick up on some aspects sort of linked into this, but as a scene setter, I was going to cover sort of an overview of the sustainable finance market, looking at the global trends and what we've been able to achieve in a small market in New Zealand, but I think we've actually punched above our weight, as I'll cover off. Looking at some of the drivers, so regulation has been a big driver. I've got the rise of the conscious consumer. Actually, Steve's got a number of insights around that. I'm actually pivoting to talk about the conscious investor and why that matters for businesses as they look at their strategic initiatives around sustainability and sustainable finance options. And also what we're sort of seeing emerging from sort of the global ESG trends that are also important because what we see happening globally tends to make its way to New Zealand as well. Just bear with me. So look, I'll jump straight in terms of the developments of the sustainable finance markets. So look, there's a number of sustainable finance instruments available. I will pick up on those on an upcoming slide. I think what I'm trying to really illustrate here is that there's been a significant uplift in terms of sustainable finance globally. 2023 was a strong year. 2022 was a strong year, and this year is likely to deliver another significant amount of sustainable financing. The New Zealand market managed to deliver a record year in 2022. We did see a slight pullback in issuance globally. And indeed, when you look at the New Zealand market, as I touched on, we have punched above our weight in terms of growth over recent years, actually outperforming on a year-on-year basis the growth in the global markets. This year, we've kicked off with a reasonable start as well, with green bond issuances from the likes of Contact Energy, Meridian Energy, and Kiwi Property Group, and a sustainable financing bond from the local government funding agency, as well as activity in the loan market with sustainable linked loans from the likes of Pamu and Wellington International Airport. In terms of the makeup of the products on offer, and this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I just wanted to highlight the differences in these products, and that sort of links into what Steve will touch on later, where he'll talk about green loans in particular. So the use of proceeds bubbles on the left touch on instruments where there is a need for there to be an eligible asset on the company's balance sheet. So green loans and bonds, examples there I've touched on already. I talked about the Contact Energy, Meridian green bond issues. So they were financing assets that were renewable energy assets. Kiwi Property, their green bond was in relation to assets that are green buildings. There's a need for these products to be aligned to international principles, and so in the case of green bonds, it's the green bond principles that are administered by the International Capital Markets Association, and there's also the climate bond standards, which is a NGO based in London who provide a certification on green instruments as well. The yellow bubble is in relation to social financing, and that can be, for example, in relation to social housing, and in that sort of area in the middle, the sustainability bonds and loans, is where financing is raised that can be used to finance social and green assets. And so there's not too many companies that have both, but an example would be Kaingaora, who were a substantial issuer of sustainability bonds, and they were financing green buildings in terms of the new homes they're building, and those homes are also providing a social good, so hence their ability to access the sustainability market. Locally, for those of you in Canterbury, Christchurch City Holdings has also issued a sustainability bond in relation to green buildings, and the social asset was the fibre rollout, with digital inclusion being an important social consideration. Look, the sustainability linked products on the right hand side, there is no need for an asset to be financed in their case. That has been a positive thing, because it meant that companies that don't have green or social assets in their balance sheets can still participate in the marketplace. But it is quite a different product. So ultimately it requires again, these products need to adhere to or align with international principles, and these principles talk about the need to establish predetermined relevant core material key performance indicators. The most common one being around emissions reductions, as you can imagine, and these KPIs or key performance indicators need to be aligned to the sustainability strategy of the company, and the targets that are set need to be ambitious, and so representing something that is beyond a business as usual trajectory. And in return for being able to achieve the forward-looking ambitious sustainable performance targets, there is a funding discount available to companies. Equally, failure to meet preset thresholds can also result in a funding increase or pricing increase. So ultimately what this product is all about is trying to align the company's sustainability ambitions with their financing and provide incentives for meeting those objectives. We're fortunate to hear from Synlait later on, and they were a leader in the New Zealand market in terms of this type of instrument. Synlait completed the first sustainability-linked loan in 2019, and ANZ had the good fortune to partner with Synlait and be the lender of that particular loan. So we look forward to hearing more from Synlait a little bit later. So looking at the drivers, and I think as I mentioned, Steve will talk on in particular around sort of what's happening with the consumer. I think I've got some sort of mega trends that as I call them, that I wanted to run through, and certainly in relation to that, I would sort of liken this in terms of being a mega trend, because when we look back through time, we've sort of seen significant periods of change, and ultimately that change has often resulted in companies that have embraced these trends and adapted, benefiting and doing well, and perhaps those who have been reluctant to accept the changes have suffered as a result. So look, I feel the market has certainly reached a tipping point in terms of green, social and sustainable products, and they're becoming mainstream very quickly. One of the sort of key points I wanted to make was that ultimately access to capital and the cost of capital is becoming tied to companies' abilities to demonstrate that they have a sustainability strategy in place and are delivering against it. We're seeing that demand from consumers wanting to understand the provenance of products and services they consume, coupled with the regulatory impulse for greater transparency for companies, with the likes of the mandatory climate-related disclosures coming out on a compulsory basis from next year. Locally, we've had a lot of work done by companies who are captured by this. Certainly, and these are catalysts for rapid change in the marketplace. So look, I think there's a clear need for businesses to recognise wider stakeholder groups and balance profits with purpose. So look, I'm going to sort of pick up on some of these trends in more details, in particular what we're sort of seeing from global markets as well. This slide is really sort of picking up on this a little bit further, but look, I wanted to sort of touch on the fact that sustainable development has been defined by the World Commission on Environment and Development in 1987 as being development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think that balance between economic growth and considerations around social and environmental balance are becoming very much front of mind as we move forward. In terms of what it means for New Zealand, I think look, there's a couple of things that sort of strike me when I think about New Zealand. And Aotearoa New Zealand is a unique economy. We have unique opportunities and challenges. And look, when I look at our emissions profile, most of you will be aware that 50% of our gross emissions are coming from agriculture, and that ultimately reflects the significant and important role that agriculture plays in our economy and in terms of our export-based marketplace. The Ministry for the Environment came out this week, as you may have seen, and announced that that our emissions were down a modest 0.7% from 2020, and it's the second successive year of emissions reduction. So that is a positive in some regards. Agri emissions falling 1.5% for the same period, so the sector delivering more than the overall reductions. But putting that in context, if we were to meet our 2030 Paris commitments, we need a close to 42% reduction over the next 7 years. So that equates to around 6.6% per annum, well in excess of what we've been delivering over recent times. So look, it just highlights the significant amount of work that's required. I think certainly, B-Link innovation, that's exactly the type of thing that we're going to have to rely on. Finding new innovative ways to address some of these emissions. On the bright spot, and it's well known that we have a strong renewable energy market in terms of our hydro, geothermal, wind, and a growing solar presence. So look, New Zealand has a unique position in terms of that, and that is helpful, an opportunity potentially, but it does sort of put out there to us, the challenge. But I think there's certainly reasons for us to be optimistic, particularly if we embrace innovation and are willing to invest in that in business change, but also in technology change. Look, New Zealand's been busy in terms of our regulatory backdrop, and I think certainly that's well known to most of you on the call. Certainly, I think from a sustainable finance point of view, the announcement of mandatory climate risk reporting was somewhat of a catalytic event in terms of the reaction we have seen and the interest we've seen in terms of sustainability more broadly. Possibly a shift at that point from a question as to why is this important to more how do we go about this process of change. And look, there's more change on the horizon. The Natural and Built Environment Bill is progressing. Some information out on that in February. That works along the Spatial Planning Bill to replace the Resource Management Act. The Climate Adaptation Bill is in progress. I mentioned mandatory risk reporting. We were the first country in the world to bring that into action. So in some ways, it may feel that we're doing a lot. From a global point of view, there's a significant amount of rapid change happening in other markets. Well, certainly the European regulators, certainly been at the forefront of the regulatory impulse. And indeed, just out this week was another EU landmark piece of legislation around deforestation. So effectively, this law bans the imports of coffee, beef, soy, and other commodities linked to deforestation. The law requires exporters into the EU to produce a due diligence statement and verify that the goods that they are producing and exporting into the EU are not grown on land deforested after 2020. So look, it's just another example of the rapidly changing environment we're in. It is a key driver. One of the first ones I was going to touch on. And I don't see this this change or this trend changing anytime soon. When Minister O'Connor signed the free trade agreement with the EU, one of the points he made was the fact that with that agreement came expectations and obligations around the sustainability of produce being exported into the market. So for New Zealand, I think there's a big opportunity if we embrace sustainability in terms of the products that we are producing. There is a big opportunity to not only preserve our export markets, but potentially grow them. And so I think that is a challenge, but certainly a big opportunity for a country like New Zealand. Look, access to capital is another trend that I wanted to touch on. So look, I've pulled this data from the RIA Mindful Money survey from last year. That's touching on the New Zealand environment and sort of highlighting just how focused consumers of financial products are. So where Kiwis are putting their money, they actually want to see that money being managed for good and invested in sustainable businesses. New Zealand's a large importer of global capital, largely via the banking sector. And global investors are expecting banks to deliver on their sustainability plans. ANZ and a number of our peers, banks globally representing around 40% of global banking assets, are committed to aligning our lending and investment portfolios with a net zero emissions target by 2050 through the Net Zero Banking Alliance. And so that means that we need to engage with our lending clients and support them in their transition plans if we're to achieve our finance emissions targets under these commitments. So certainly as we go out as a bank and raise capital from global markets, the focus of investors in terms of the performance that we've achieved on an ongoing basis receives a lot of scrutiny, and so certainly as a bank and certainly as clients of the bank, we do need to collectively show that we're making progress. So look, I'm almost out of time, I think. So look, I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly. I've got some global trends that I wanted to highlight. Possibly
you have another 5 minutes, Dean. So just do what you need to do.
Okay, perfect. No, that's great. Look, I can wrap this one up in 5 minutes. So the first one was sustainability as an organisational value driver, and look, there's a couple of points to make there. Firstly, McKinsey came out with a report in February this year showing that products that have ESG related claims, validated claims, on average saw 28% cumulative growth over the past 5 years, and that compares to 20% for products that weren't supported by sustainability claims. So, certainly, that supports, the value driver for having a strong, sustainable, credible products. I think as well, the recent New Zealand Institute of Directors survey went out and surveyed directors, asking them to choose 3 future trends that they were currently paying attention to. And changing customer expectations was number 1, so that was at 60%. Closely linked to that is changing community expectations at 47%. And changing expectations, particularly around climate change, were causing boards to reflect on their organisational purpose, the value proposition, and the business model. And coming in second on that list was, in fact, climate change, water, and resource management issues at 51%. So clearly, in spite of all the challenges going on and for businesses, the directors are certainly still seeing that these issues are very much front of mind and very much important in terms of the long-term strategic focus of the business. I've touched on transparency and the access to capital. Environmental markets, I believe, is an interesting area and certainly an emerging opportunity with the likes of carbon and biodiversity credits developing. But again, the development of that market is going to be contingent on robust methodology and strong verifiable impact data. And I think certainly behind a lot of what we're talking about, the data aspect, being able to capture and measure strong sustainability impact is going to be vital for the ongoing development of the markets. The big one coming, and I'm going to end on this one, is natural capital and biodiversity. And just as we're all starting to grapple with assessing our carbon footprints, then certainly the next emerging trend is going to be an expectation on being able to capture our biodiversity impacts as well. So New Zealand has joined 300 parties in terms of adopting the Cummings-Montreal Biodiversity Framework in December last year. So that framework agreed between the parties to the Convention on Biodiversity commits the countries to the 30 by 30 initiative, which is to protect 30% of land and 30% of oceans globally by 2030. And that's really recognition that climate change and biodiversity loss are inextricably linked, and they need to be addressed together. And I've got a quote there from the World Wildlife Fund, which just highlights the incredible sensitivity we have from a global GDP perspective to nature and biodiversity, and certainly in the New Zealand context, we're very exposed to these, to this as well, and biodiversity loss in New Zealand is a significant risk for us. So look, I'm going to end there. I guess my main points were to highlight that we are, as I see it, in the midst of a global mega trend. I think it creates some significant opportunities. Comes with some challenges, certainly. And look, I think for New Zealand, if we embrace this opportunity, then we do have some real opportunities here. So look, thank you. I'll stop there and pass back to Wim.
Thank you very much, Dean, and thank you very much for this overview. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce Steve Dixon, and Steve is also working with the ANZ Bank, and he has been working in sustainability in the environment for the last 20 years in various management roles, including the Ministry of Environment. And at the moment, his role at ANZ is to support clients and bankers when it comes to the business risks and opportunities in the climate change and sustainable area. And he is working with instruments like, for example, the business green loans. Steve, very much happy to have you, and over to you.
Kia ora, thank you, Wim, and kia ora tātou, everybody else. Yes, thanks for having us. I'll just flick onto my slide. Hopefully, you'll all be seeing that. Just yell out, Wim, if you can't see anything. All right, yes. So thank you, Dean, for giving us a kind of high-level perspective of the, I guess, the big end of town sustainable finance space. For the bank, I work much more in the sort of the small and medium area where our businesses are looking for particular support to get on and basically meet the market. So as you'll see from my contents here, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the why. So why are businesses engaging in this? What is happening out there? Our view as a bank is that it's very much the consumers are driving this. There's a lot of talk and there's been a lot of effort and activity in the regulation space, and that's certainly very real in agriculture. But it's actually primarily consumers who are at the wheel here, who are driving this change for businesses, and they're going to ultimately decide who's successful and who's not. So I want to spend a little bit of time diving into that before I talk about the sorts of products we've got available to support businesses in this area. We'll also have a case study just to give you a sense of what businesses are doing there practically in the food and beverage space. And then obviously we'll have time in due course for questions. All right, so just need to minimize a box here that's covering half my slides. Sorry, people. So yes, look, there's a lot of activity in this space. This is a mega trend. There's no denying it. There's regulatory stuff. There's the emissions pricing, which is beginning to impact everywhere. There's climate change itself, which is changing what's possible on farms and enabling some things that might not have been possible. And it's certainly impacting on people's views about the right way to operate in business. You're seeing supply chain action, and again, this rise of the eco-conscious consumer. They've been called all sorts of things over the years. They've been what was called LOHAS, lifestyle of health and sustainability. They were conscious consumers. They were eco-consumers. They've got all sorts of names. But generally, it's these people who have a preference for living a life that's aligned with their values, and their values are around lifestyle and sustainability and health. And that tends to drive them towards what we might generally label as eco products. So that's the people we're talking about. One of the things I did need to note is that, clearly in business, and particularly in a time right now where businesses are under some stress as inflation bites and interest rates bite and the cost of living goes up, it pays to remember, and I'm not going to spend any time in the slides on this, but it pays to remember that pretty much in every business, carbon is cost. So if you're using fuels, if you're using fertilizers, if you're using electricity or energy of almost any sort, or any significant materials with a high embodied carbon component, or carbon is used in its production, then that's pure cost to your business. So what I'm out there saying a lot to businesses at the moment is look hard at where your carbon's coming from, because if you can reduce that, you're probably going to reduce costs. And so, that's a very helpful way to look at it sometimes in these slightly more trying times. As mentioned, the price of carbon until recently has been going up and up. There's been a glitch in that. The government made some decisions at the end of last year which spooked the market to some degree. So we've seen a drop of about $20 per tonne in the prices of carbon on the secondary markets, as we call it. And the most recent ETS didn't actually clear, so they didn't sell any carbon credits through that particular option. You're seeing the government responding to that quite quickly now and saying some things that I think will rectify that, and we'll have to wait and see. But in general, the trend for the price of carbon is really clear. You're already paying a price of carbon on almost everything you buy in some way or other. And sitting to the side there is He Waka Kanoa and that entire process, which is looking at, how we're going to price emissions on farm. So I won't go in there. That's an entire presentation of its own, and we all wait with bated breath to see the government's position any minute. But, clearly there will be a price on agricultural products as well, one way or the other. So let's look at these consumers. Kantar we're a surveying company that do all sorts of things, but among other things, they've done a long-term, nearly a decade-long survey on environmental attitudes, which they call the Better Futures Report. And this one was released at the end of March this year, so this data is very current. They survey about, usually it's 1,000, but they did 1,300 this year because post the cyclone and Auckland floods, they went back out to see if they'd seen an impact of those climate events on people's attitudes. And not surprisingly, there was, although it wasn't necessarily as significant as some might think. So the numbers you're seeing here have changed a little bit as inflation and cost of living has impacted people's beliefs around what they can actually do to purchase and aligned with their values. But the way they categorize consumers out there is on the left are your actives. So these are people who believe that they want to live a sustainable lifestyle and they actively purchase that way. Your considerers are those who fully believe in doing that, but they don't necessarily always walk the talk, if you like. So when they go into the supermarket, they want to buy the right things. They want to buy the eco products, but cost and brand and availability and various other things get in the way of them kind of living out that. So you can see that those two who are in some way or other on a scale are active in this space and are purchasing, and you can see the impacts of their purchasing in the aisles of supermarkets and in the availability of electric vehicles, which is difficult right now to get your hands on one if you want one, and many do. You can see the impacts of this large group at 67%, and that's dropped from earlier years. And then you have your believers who say, look, I believe in this stuff. I get it's the right thing to do, but I don't do much. I got other things going on in my life. And then you got the dismissers. Who is that uncle at the barbecue who tells you climate change isn't real, right? And they've stuck around at the kind of that 10% level for a while now. So these are the markets that are out there. And clearly when you've got 67% of your market saying they believe in this stuff, businesses are responding to that. And again, I'll move into that space in a moment. But it's not quite what you'd imagine as far as where these people are and who they are. So there's a definite alignment with income. The higher your income, the more likely you are to be an active. And the older you are, weirdly, the more likely you are to be an active. So there's a very significant component of the older generation, those boomers who we like to poke fun at, but many of them are actually walking the talk around sustainability. And that's partly because potentially they have a lot of disposable income. So price isn't such an issue for them when they're looking at products like this. But what you can see from this graph of this map of New Zealand is that the darker the green, the more active they are in purchasing as an active, as an eco-consumer. And so you've got patches of Auckland, like Mount Eden and some of the wealthier areas that are definitely acting that way. But in general, these people are, if you can see from the map, are mostly in the regions. Now, they are, they're also in Wellington and the lower North Island, but the areas which are blue and lighter blue are the kind of the weaker areas where there are fewer consumers of this type. But they're strongly represented in the region. So this is not just a Cuba Street hipster kind of a phenomenon. This is across the board in all demographics and largely in most areas of New Zealand, although you can see there are weaker and stronger areas. And it's very strongly aligned, their values and their views are very strongly aligned to things related to food. So when you ask them what sort of behaviours, what sort of everyday behaviours they're undertaking, you can see that they want to reduce their food waste, they want to compost, they want to purchase locally grown products over imported ones. They will tend towards vegetarianism. That number's dropped significantly. For unexplainable reasons, because it's generally cheaper to be a vegetarian. So I don't know how the economy's impacted that number, but that was 19% in 2022, and it's dropped since then. And then those who are offsetters and so forth. So many of the things that they're looking to do to align with their lives, with their values, are in this space of food, because a lot of what people purchase on a day-to-day basis clearly is food in the supermarkets. And not surprisingly, the supermarkets have taken note of these trends. So you may be familiar with the Climate Leaders Coalition, which has been around a good 5 or 6 years now. This is 100 of our biggest businesses. So this is all of the banks, it's Fonterra, it's Synlait, it's both of the major supermarket chains, it's some of our airports, it's Air New Zealand, So it's a lot of the big end of town, and that's important because these people have committed to be carbon zero by 2050. They've committed to be what's called a science-based target track for their industry. And that's jargon for being aligned with a 1.5 degree world, which for many of them, for example, New Zealand Post, that's a 42% reduction in their emissions by 2030. And for some, it's even more. So these businesses have all committed heavily to get their emissions down. And that includes working with their supply chains. And that's where it impacts many of the clients that I spend my time with. The small and medium businesses are starting to get RFPs that they're responding to from the big end of town or from government, which have got very strong clauses around sustainability in them. And they're asking questions about that. And many of these businesses are taking this as a collegial kind of cooperative approach. They're encouraging their businesses and their suppliers to get on board and support these larger businesses to reduce their emissions. But when push comes to shove, they have a target that they've declared in their annual reports that the boards have signed up to, and they need to find a way to reduce those emissions. And suppliers to these businesses are part of their emissions profile. So their scope 3 emissions, or supplier emissions. So they're captured as part of, say, New Zealand Post or ANZ's footprint. So we go out talking to suppliers and we want them to reduce because that brings down our footprint as well. And so that's what's starting to trickle down into our industries. And here's just a snapshot of food and beverages businesses generally, both in New Zealand but internationally. Again, in the food and bev space, we're exporters. 90% plus of our products are going overseas. And this is our market. These are the gatekeepers to the customers that we want to reach. So it's the Sainsbury's and the Tesco's and the Nestle's and the Danones who are buying our product to use it as a raw material into their products or their our access to these international markets. And you can see, and I will not read all of these out because you'll get these you'll get a recording so you can rest on this slide at a later date. But basically, Google any large multinational business in the food and beverage space, and they will have a net zero target of some sort. And you can see they range from sort of 2040 to 2050, and significant reductions in the interim periods like 2030. So again, we have suppliers in New Zealand, tier 1 suppliers to the likes of Danone and Nestle, who've received letters from these guys saying, we need you to reduce your emissions. You're part of our footprint. What are you going to do to align with our targets? Because we've committed to this. And the obvious message underneath that, not said in black and white, is if you can't do it, we'll find someone who can. And so this is kind of what we're seeing rolling out. The impact of this mega trend of eco-consumers who exist everywhere is starting to drive significant changes in the attitudes and behaviours of our major buyers. And here are our international markets as surveyed by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. This is 2022 figures. So they survey our 5 biggest markets every couple of years. These are major surveys, sort of 5,000 plus. And you can see the similar categories. They're not exactly aligned with Kantar's definitions, but they largely are. And you can see that in most of those major markets, it's well over 50%. In some cases like China, it's nearly 80% of consumers are looking for sustainable, healthy, hormone-free, grass-fed, all of the good stuff that we're able to provide. So this is not me saying to farmers and those in the food and bev industry, watch out. You've got major risks. You do have those risks, but actually it's opportunity writ large. We are so well positioned as a country to meet this market and to meet these demands. We've got some work to do in there's some serious areas of activity, including on-farm climate reduction and so forth. But we are much better positioned than many of our competitors internationally. So this is opportunity for us in the bank. The conversations we're having with clients is get on board here because the door's open for the sorts of products we're able to produce. You've just got to get the credibility and the verification and certifications aligned, and then these doors open to you. And that's why Fonterra has a number of carbon zero products out in markets, both here and in the US. That's why Silver Fern Farmers and farms have invested so much in carbon zero beef into the US, because they're getting access to markets there, which the doors literally weren't open. to them to sell product in certain supermarket chains, particularly on the East Coast. Those doors are now open and they're doing very well, and that's coming down into the farmers who are providing that carbon zero product. You know, so some of our processors get this, and there's lots of activity in New Zealand which is looking to target this market, but it's very early days for us, and we need to accelerate. But you know, this is the market we're trying to meet. And here's an example of a kind of a local business, Sawmill Brewing. Many of you will be familiar with their products. Hopefully, they're based in Matakana. They make about 1 million to 1.5 million litres of beer a year. And they've always sort of been on this journey of sustainability in various ways, but it was very much from a pragmatic kind of direction. So they were undercapitalized, like many good businesses are, particularly in the brewing industry and the craft beer space. So everything they've done on this long list of environmental kind of improvements was all done because the business case stacked up. So when you put solar panels on your roofs and you're getting up to 94% of summer energy needs and 78% of your winter energy needs, those solar panels pay for themselves very, very quickly. And we're seeing this across the board now. We're getting business cases for businesses where solar panels are paying for themselves in 6 or 7 years. You know, so after year 7, it's free energy. You know, so that's the sort of thing they've been doing. And the bulk grain sacks is an interesting one. They wanted to get rid of the waste of the sacks. So they put a grain silo in to the brewery. They now get 2 deliveries of bulk grain a year. That grain is cheaper to purchase because it's cheaper when it comes bulk than in sacks. And they're not having to dispose of those 12,000 sacks. And also they're not having to handle those sacks, which means it saves them time, it saves them costs on staff and so on and so forth. And there are other examples there which I won't go into. There's been a long journey here, but they're incredibly, they're still a profitable brewery. They're doing very well, but one of the major side effects of this is that the same people who want to live these lifestyles and purchase aligned with those lifestyles, they also want to work for people who believe the same thing. So in the hospitality space, we're all very familiar with the shortages of staff and the difficulties that hospitals had in those areas. The Sawmill Brewery and bar and restaurant have had none of those issues. So they've always managed to maintain staff and always get good access to staff, and they've had staff who've been with them for over a decade. Because people want to work for businesses that align with their values. It makes sense, really. Many of you out there listening to this feel the same way. So that's one of the kind of the benefits of this space, is that if you're trying to attract staff, the people who are looking for jobs are also looking for employers who align with the way they think. So when you ask Mike, you know, he says there's no doubt that running our business sustainability has delivered, you know, long-term efficiency gains. He comes from a very pragmatic engineering perspective. It's all about efficiency for him. And to be sustainable is to be very efficient in most cases. And in turn, that's led to direct profitability. And in his case, it's not just about cutting costs out of the business, it's also about opening markets. It's about getting access to the shelves of foodstuff supermarkets, because you've got such a positive story to say around your product. And so when you're talking to a category buyer, you know, they're interested in those stories, and it might make the difference between whether you get that shelf space or not. And it certainly has made that difference for these guys. So now let's spend some time on actual sustainable finance, being the topic of the seminar. Latish last year, ANZ launched a green business loan. A green business loan basically means we'll loan you money at a heavily discounted rate for activities in your business that are going to have a positive environmental impact. And I'll get a little bit more into what those categories are and what we mean by positive in a second. So we're looking at loans of up to $3 million and as low as $5,000. They're 5-year loans at a floating interest rate that is roughly the cost of the money that the bank has to spend to get that money. So internationally, we access money from treasuries, and both domestically but largely overseas. The cost of that money right now to us starts with a 5 generally, but we add no margin to these loans. We add no risk weighting to these loans. And so we're offering these loans at the moment at about 5.6. Don't absolutely quote me on that. Go to our website and check the number, but it's roughly in that area. If you came to us as a business for a loan, you'd almost certainly be offered a loan for something outside of the green loan space with an 8 or a 9 in front of it. And that's just because that's what the cost of money plus margin plus risk weighting is for the bank. But we're also really particular about who we will loan to, in the sense that we're all very aware of this greenwashing phenomenon and the focus that consumers have on that. And so we've aligned with what's known as the Green Loan Principles, which are international principles. And we are audited, our loans are going to be audited by a consultancy company against these principles. So we're really careful both to protect the bank, but also to protect our customers, that the use of these proceeds are for the green purposes that the business has applied for, that they can clearly show how that money has been used for that purpose, that there's regular reporting on what the impact of that is, and obviously we're looking for positive environmental impacts. And just our processes internally have got to align and align with our criteria. So we're careful about how we loan this money, but that doesn't mean that we make it hard for customers. We're actually making it as easy as we possibly can to access this money. But we do have to meet this criteria to protect ourselves from greenwashing claims and also to protect our customers. So you'll see the categories that we're currently offering loans in. Renewable energy, I'll touch more on in a moment. Energy efficiency is all sorts of equipment and materials and AC systems and lighting and things within buildings. Green buildings, if you want to build a Homestar 6 residential building or a development, or a Green Star 5 and above commercial building, then we'll loan at a green loan rate for that. Sustainable land use, I'll touch more on. That's a lot of our on-farm activities. Likewise, sustainable water and wastewater is another significant series of on-farm activities that we will fund through a green loan. Green clean transportation is obviously about vehicles, e-vehicles or very low emissions vehicles. And then pollution prevention control is around equipment and process re-engineering and other things that are going to reduce waste within a business. So very broad categories that we'll support. And with that, I'll sign off for now.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was really a comprehensive overview of what is on offer and what people can actually access. One company was very early, a very early adapter of sustainable finance, as already mentioned by Dean, is Sinlay. And I'm really happy that we have JD van Heeren online from Sinlay, finance expert, was previously based in South Africa, but we are very fortunate that he actually moved to New Zealand to share his knowledge there. And he has been working with Sinlay since 2019. JD, over to you.
Thanks, Wim. Yeah, good day, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to share a bit of Sinlay's story. So I'll just give me a second. I'll share the screen with you. Right. I hope you can all see that.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. So I think for today, what I'm going to do is maybe just start off by talking a little bit about our business first. I'm not 100% sure how many of those online are familiar with our business, so spend a little bit of time on that. Talk to our business sustainability framework. As Wim just mentioned, we were one of the first adopters of, especially on the financial institutions loans that were available. Dean mentioned that earlier as well. So just to create a picture of what our focus is, and I'll take you also through one of our current initiatives as an example, talking to the number of things that you need to take into account when you consider all of these things, and you know, put an application together that you can take to a financial institution or other companies that you might collaborate with on some of these initiatives and things that you have to keep in mind. And then lastly, also just quickly touch on you know, the whole idea of sustainable finance within the context of Sinlay. So I don't have a specific slide on our business, so I'll just quickly talk to that and then move on to the rest of the slides. So those of you who don't know, Synlait is a dairy manufacturing company. We focus specifically on powders, so anything with whole milk powder, skim milk powder, AMFs, and anhydrous milk fat. In fact, you might actually see the warehouse in the background behind me, full of stock on the powders and AMF drums and everything that we're busy storing here on its way overseas. And then the second big part of our business is also on the nutrition space, so specifically on infant formula. So obviously our big customer at the moment there is A2. So most of our product in the infant space currently being produced for them. And then on the third leg is focused on the consumer foods and food service. So things like your fresh cream and milk, typically, your FSSI, that's foodstuffs that supply to the South Island. So we deal with them. Also looking into entering markets on the whipping cream area and things like that. So those are the focus areas of our business. And when it comes to my role specifically, as Viv mentioned, I'm more on the finance side and joined the company in 2019, not necessarily focusing specifically on sustainability at Synlait, but and I guess that's one of the fortunate things of being able to work in I won't say a small, but probably more medium sized business that's a publicly listed company as well, where you get the opportunity to work on all different kinds of projects. So I've been in the fortunate position of working with the teams within our business on some of these sustainability initiatives, and in fact currently I'm working with my team as well. The head of sustainability for Synlait are at the moment, the team are at the moment overseas busy talking about next initiatives and things that we want to do, and hopefully negotiating well enough that we can secure some more funding for more of our plans that we've got. So that's just a little bit of background about the business and about me. And I'm saying that specifically also because I don't regard myself as necessarily as a sustainability expert, but I do have a little bit of exposure to these initiatives within the Synlait context. So later on, when it comes to the Q&A, if it's very technically related kind of sustainability questions, I might have to pass that back to Dean and Steve, or maybe go back to, if it's specific to Synlait, to my team on sustainability, and promise to get back to you with an answer. Right. So just moving on to our framework. So we try and capture it all around the core of the purpose of our business, which is basically to do milk differently for a healthier world. So you can see there's basically 3 pillars that we keep in mind when it comes to any kind of dealings that we do, when it comes to the people in our business, when it comes to our suppliers. So the one there is the net positive for the planet, and under the net positive for planet, you'll see there the things that we focus on specifically are on circular economy, welfare, water, climate issues. A lot of these has been addressed in some of the earlier talks as well. The second pillar on the world-class value chain. So trying to focus on sustainability initiatives within the not only supply chain, but the whole value chain. So we're looking at ways to improve on sustainability supply, safe food, which is of course especially on the infant side, one of the utmost important things that we need to look at. Transparency in terms of how we do what we do, and a little bit later I'll just quickly show you the sustainability report that we publish every year. That shows you quite a significant amount of information about our initiatives, what we do, and how we perform. And then, of course, healthy farming, which is also at the core of what we do. So some of you online might already be suppliers, farm suppliers to Synlait, and already be part of the Lead with Pride program that we run, which is also, of course, one of our key sustainability initiatives to help to reduce, for example, GHG on farms and things like that. The third pillar then is a healthier Synlait, so that's where focus is quite a bit on the people. So within our business also, the culture, the community, diversity, talent development, so investment in people, create a safe workplace, so quite a big focus on our health and safety on our business as well. So that pretty much captures the framework of Synlait in terms of sustainability. And then also worth mentioning that in 2020, we became part of the Certified B Corporation. And then just a little note there in terms of what that means. So there at the bottom, basically consider the impact of decisions on our workers, customers, suppliers, community, and the environment, which clearly then links very nicely into the framework that we've set ourselves. So what I've decided to do, rather than focusing specifically on the whole process of just applying for funding from a financial institution like ANZ as an example, to try and make it a bit more practical, I decided to focus on one of the specific initiatives that I've been involved with at Synlait as well. And this initiative is referred to as the Made with Better Milk initiative. Now, the two main objectives of this initiative is to help enable our customers to reach their corporate sustainability commitments and targets. And what I mean by that is that if you think about the product that we produce, it's not only to benefit us as Synlait, as our own business, but if we can produce product that meets certain criteria within the sustainability space, it's also possible for our customers who buy those products from us to make some of those sustainability claims and using that to meet some of their targets as well. So very beneficial, obviously, then to work together in this space, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a bit later on. The second objective of Made with Better Milk is to help customers to differentiate their product. So the one example there is that we've got a verified grass-fed milk pool, meaning that when we collect the milk from those specific farms, we can classify it as grass-fed specifically. Again, the products that we make using that specific milk, when it ends up with a customer and the customer do whatever they do with that product and put it on the shelves so for example, the grocery stores and things like that, they can actually also use on the label and claim that it's made from grass-fed milk as well. So the tailored solutions. So what we do, and again, I'm going to spend a little bit more time to talk to this, is the value propositions which we co-develop with our customers. So the NPD, which stands for the New Product Development. So it does happen that from time to time, our customers approach us and then inquire about potential new products, specifically within the sustainability space. So typically, as an example, the grass-fed product. So if we can make additional or new products using that specific milk, and how that can benefit our customer, and then obviously at the same time how that can benefit us. And then the collaborative projects on farm or on site. So there's quite a number of initiatives. I've mentioned the initiative of Lead with Pride a bit earlier, where we work very closely with our farmers. At the moment, I believe about 70% of our farmer suppliers are already classified and certified as part of our Lead with Pride program. There are incentives associated with that as well. So over and above the farm gate milk price that we pay to the farmers, we also normally include incentives that's paid towards the farmers that work towards the sustainable farming. That also goes for on-site. So quite a number of initiatives that we focus on specifically here on-site and across New Zealand, because we're not only based in the South Island, And so wherever we can, we implement those initiatives as well. So the one example I want to talk to a little bit in more detail is the greenhouse gas reductions, where we've started to do quite a few trials, specifically with on-farm technologies and practices. And this is something that we are very actively busy with right now, and the specific, and we don't necessarily want to mention the name just yet, but one of our specific multinational customers that work with us very closely on this one. Regen Ag. So some of you might know that we're currently busy in a 5-year pilot study in collaboration with Ag Research that a lot of you, I think, are well familiar with. Also companies like Danone and about 10 farmer suppliers to help us with the research, to continue to identify opportunities to move into that space and make more sustainable farming practices. And then the last one there is in terms of our packaging. So target there that we set ourselves is that 100% of our product packaging to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025, which of course is not a very long timeline, but making some good progress there. So to focus in specifically on the low GHG or lower GHG initiatives by means of a new product development or milk streaming, and as I mentioned before, this is with one of our specific customers that we're working on. We've been working on this for quite some time now, and making some really good progress. And the good thing is that as you work through these initiatives with your customers, you don't have to wait right until the end before you start implementing some of these. So some of these things have already been starting to implement on some of our farms or on site. And as we continue, we collectively and in collaboration identify some more opportunities to work towards as well. So first bullet there, in terms of what from internally in our business, what we need to consider is almost everything across the entire supply chain. Now, I'm just trying to point out a few things here to put it in context, because I think, a lot of time looking from the outside to a business, you might think, well, how difficult is it really to just identify some opportunities or initiatives and implement it, and you go and you ask for money and you get the money and you do it. Unfortunately, it's not that easy, especially from an internal point of view, and especially within business like Synlait, where we have to work with quite a number of constraints in terms of when do you produce what kind of product, depending on obviously the specs and requirements from the specific customers who we produce it for. Things like the milk quality windows, so it's very seasonal. So quite a number of things that we need to take into account to really get to a point where we say, yeah, we're quite comfortable in terms of what we think this is going to cost us. And then obviously need to work with a customer, but potentially also with the likes of banks to secure the funding to be able to implement those. So if I use this one as an example, one of the first things in terms of the supply chain is, of course, the farms. So the farm selection to be able to achieve the desired level of GHG reduction becomes extremely important. So we've got roughly about 280 farms in the South Island producing and supplying us with milk. Each of the farms have varying degree of GHG, and therefore we need to determine what is the target level in collaboration, of course, with the customer in terms of the product we can produce using that milk. And we have to almost kind of ring fence those farms to target in terms of collecting that milk and then bring on site and start producing. Now, that is the first thing that you need to consider, right? Because you physically have to send out the trucks, and depending on how concentrated the farms are that you've targeted and ring fence, going to determine the cost associated with things like the milk collection. So that in itself can increase cost quite significantly. In terms of the silos of streaming, so once those trucks come on site, you can't necessarily just put it into the same silos as your regular milk, or for example, your A2 milk. So that has to be streamed separately, which again is going to impact our cost structure. The processing itself, so the capacity that we've got available, again, based on all the constraints that we need to consider when it comes to the manufacturing process. The cleaning after dryers, so in other words, if we were busy making a product just before we started processing this specific stream of milk into the Made with Better milk products, how much cleaning would be required, the changeover. So in other words, if some of the powder is still left in the dryer, we need to change that and bring in the new milk. And so how much of that new powder is going to be changeover powder first that we need to take out of the mix? How much is that going to cost us? Do we have enough headcounts and enough people to help us with this process? Packaging, a lot of the packaging obviously would be determined in terms of the kind of product that we make, especially if there's labeling that we would like to add, or the customer would like to add to the specific product. Do we have the storage? What's the cost associated with the storage? The quality and testing, again, quality at the front of what we do. And of course, to be able to ensure that we meet those quality standards, a lot of testing and potentially additional testing when it comes to the sustainable specific kind of products that we want to make. And of course, audits. It was mentioned earlier as well that independent audits are being done. So we can't just simply make the product and claim that we meet these specific targets and criteria without it being independently audited as well. So I just came up there with an indicative number. By no means a true indication of necessarily of our product and what it could cost us. But so argument's sake, so if we say, all of the above comes to say $150 per metric ton in additional costs, and our agreement with the customer is to supply them with about 20,000 metric tons of that specific product, you're looking at roughly about $3 million additional costs. Now, keep in mind, this is additional. So it's over and above the normal cost of producing our normal product. And then it's a case of now we need to decide, okay, so is the purpose of this to make profit? So in other words, how does this impact our margin? Do we just simply want to do cost recovery? So in other words, just our way of continuing to improve on and assist on improving on the sustainability space. We need to consider alternatives, especially when it comes to GHG gas emissions. So there are alternatives available, like the emission trade schemes. So companies could just as well go and trade on those, and by doing that, have the right to have the level of emissions that we experience of them. So is it really necessary for them to work with us and collaborate with us to be able to bring that down? So quite a number of additional things that we need to take into account as well. So then coming to, I guess, the topic of this specific event. So from my previous slide, I believe that you can see now that it's quite a process to go through in terms of all different kinds of investments of time and effort and resource, and then of course you need the money at the end of the day as well, which makes it very, very important for us to be able to build some really good relationship with our banks. ANZ, of course, one of the key example banks. I think Dean mentioned earlier as well, the loan that we were able to secure back in 2019. We were the first company to be able to do that, a $50 million loan. Since then, we've also been able to do the same with BNZ, also another $50 million loans. And at the moment, we've roughly got about $100 million ESG-linked loans on our balance sheet. There's continuous evaluation that underpins these loans, and this is done by Sustainalytics, and the focus of them will be on things like governance, water management, carbon intensity, employee engagement, turnover, quality certifications, waste management. So quite a number of things that we need to constantly make sure that we meet, so that for all of our future initiatives, we can make use of the good relationship we've built with the banks and with our customers to try and secure these funding. The last thing I just want to mention here before I quickly show you what the report looks like. Of course, I'm not going to work through the report because it's about a 42 page report. just to show you, you know, the level of transparency we provide to the market. Is the question of profit versus the right to play. And by right to play, I mean to actually continue to do business. So I think a lot of time, you know, the ideas, and it was mentioned earlier as well, that you think that, you know, securing a loan and using that loan to invest in initiatives surely must come with profit. Yes, it does, but not always. And therefore you have to find the balance also in terms of the profitability of those initiatives or the business in general, but also the right to do business, and specifically with the customers and the area that you play in. So if you think about the fact that you know, almost a quarter of this greenhouse gas, as per the slides that we saw earlier, comes from, you know, the dairy industry. There's quite a bit to do and to focus on within our business area, and the likes of big customers like your Danones, Nestle's, those multinational customers will most likely move towards a time, probably not that long into the future anymore, where they would simply just stop doing business with players that do not meet this criteria. So it's always a very, very fine balance in terms of if your business case shows you that this is not necessarily going to make you money, whether that is something that you would still need to invest in for the purpose of what you're trying to do here, in terms of the sustainability, and therefore be able to continue to do business in future. So I've just got the link here in terms of our profitability, or not profitability, the sustainability report. And I'll just quickly show you what it looks like. So I hope you can see that. You can see there's a 42-page document giving a bit of an introduction, also showing our few highlights there, and also just bringing it into the Synlait context. So I've talked a little bit about our framework. And I would like to encourage you, those of you who are interested, to go and have a look at this document and see, you know, the progress that we've made in terms of all of our initiatives. So the document is set out. I've talked quite a bit about the Made with Better Milk in terms of the solutions, the initiatives, how far we've come, things like net positive for the planet. So you can see there it's all arranged in terms of the initiatives, and talk about the progress that we've made within these areas as well. So quite a lot of things going on in our business at the moment, and I'm pretty sure we'll most likely spend a bit more time with the likes of Steve and Dean in future, to hopefully continue to work together in this space. So back to you, Wim.
Thank you very much, JD. Really interesting. I continue to learn on this in this job. I'm really privileged. Dean, you have your camera fixed. Very welcome. And I like to do the Q&A. I realize that we run a little bit over time, but the interest was the topic was so good, and you guys did such an amazing job that I thought it was to let you guys actually continue with your presentations, because that would probably answer a lot of the questions that will be out there. I have two questions at the moment in the Q&A. So the people that are online, I encourage you to put questions in there, and I will ask the panelists to actually answer them. We have a question from somebody anonymous. What is your approach to funding land use change away from high emission land uses? I think this would be a question for either Dean or Steve.
Yeah, Steve, do you want to talk about it in terms of the business green light, in terms of the approach there? And I can perhaps elaborate more generally.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we don't, as a bank, have a policy to not fund certain land uses directly. But you can see from the kind of the tendency and the direction of the green loans what we're encouraging and what we're supporting. You know, any business that comes to us has to meet a whole bunch of, you know, typical criteria of businesses, profitability and appropriateness of governance and so on and so forth. So all that continues. What we're trying to do with our messaging and with the likes of the green loan and our sustainable finance support is to direct businesses and to take a path that we think is ultimately going to be most successful for them. But beyond that, we don't have direct rules that we will not fund. We will not fund certain sectors. At this stage, that's not where we've gone. Okay.
Yeah, and just adding to that, I mean, it's not directly answering that particular question, but I think certainly we do take a lens in terms of the overall sustainability practices of the company. And so, if a company is looking to access sustainable financing, then there is a lens. And again, this is really coming out of the principles I talked about earlier, where there's an expectation that sustainability practices will be embedded within their business, and so there is a suitability consideration in terms of transactions that are brought to market, and certainly the bond market takes a very close look at not just whether a green asset has been financed, but what is the overall sustainability performance of that company.
I think one of the difficulties in this space, and there's a clear message when we're saying we won't fund pure carbon forestry with a green loan. So there's a very clear message there that we're not going to support that sort of substantive land use change. But when you look at sectors like dairying, there's a significant difference between a really good performer and someone who's top performer and lead with pride, right? There's a 15% carbon difference probably between those two. So I think, it's not just that certain sectors and certain land uses are bad or good. It's that the users of that land and the businesses on that land can be better or worse than each other. And we're all about encouraging everybody to move up in performance. And that's, clearly what the financing is there to support.
Thank you so much. I think another question for you, Steve. Victor is asking if you can give us a comparison, because he said that sustainable loans have a discount on the rate. Can you give us a comparison on average how high that is?
So I've had time to do my research because Victor got his question in early. So the current green loan rate is 5.95%, right? Now, I can't say what a business loan would be if you came to us to do something that wasn't within those green loan categories, because it depends on the business and the risk margin that we may attach to that business. And then obviously there's a profit margin on top of that. So, but as I said in the presentation, almost certainly any business loan will start with an 8 and it's probably going to start with a 9. So that's the kind of differential right now. And obviously that will change as the OCR and cost of money changes. And sadly, in the last year and a half, that's only been going in one direction. Maybe later this year we'll see a turn in that. But I'm not a financial analyst, so I'm making no predictions.
Thank you so much, Steve. And since there are no more questions and we're almost up in time, I think I want to end by basically saying it seems that it pays to actually become more and more and more sustainable, not only from a financing cost point of view, but also from a customer retention and attractiveness point of view. Thank you so much, JD, Dean, and Steve, for being with us and talking to us through the sustainable financing focused on the agricultural and the primary sector. I want to let you know that on the 10th of May, we actually have an event here at the B-Link Innovation Space at Lincoln University campus, being a person challenging art of living well in today's world. And that is actually in person. And so please go to the B-Link website, blinkinnovation.com, to register for that. Thank you all, JD, Dean, Steve, for your contribution. Thank you all attendants for being here. I wish you a good day.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Everybody.